It's one of his more famous images of a blind woman. It's from 1916. So Paul Strand, this is when in the 19th century, photography, portraits in photography, you see all of those daguerreotypes of people kind of very still with no expression on their face. So in early photography, in early 19th century photography, you couldn't move. So, you were kind of set up on a chair. You had, something behind you so that you could rest your head. You couldn't smile because you couldn't hold the smile. It took too long. So photography completely changed as cameras evolved, and Strand actually added a prism to his camera so that he was able to take photographs on the street without people realizing. Obviously, with the blind woman, he didn't need to be so discreet, but he was, and that carries over to, there is a Bravo right here. This guy's also sleeping. Kaylin, can I hand you this one? So this is a Bravo portrait from, I think, 1931. You guys feel free to get close and look if,
So can you tell us about the Strand print? When was it printed?
So the Strand print is a later print, actually. Do you know when that was printed, Kaylin? I don't. It was printed during his lifetime, but it's not a vintage print. And it was printed by Strand, but it was printed later, maybe in the 70s. I don't have my list. I left it upstairs. I don't think it has a print date on it. Yeah.
That's okay, I was just curious.
Yeah.
To what extent is the printed photograph of the blind woman, I don't know if humorous is the right word, but let's say playful, in that we're seeing.
Right.
We can see it.
Right.
But it's labeled blind. It's a little bit like Magritte, this is not a pipe.
Right,
thing.
exactly.
It's a pipe, and
Exactly.
It's not a pipe.
Exactly.
But it's blind, but we're seeing it.
Right.
So,
I mean,
is it about vision or?
Yes, and photography got to a point where, it was so accessible to people, and even more so, I mean, think of it today. But at that time, it was just evolving and changing so much, and there were so many things that you could do with it. And photographers just wanted to document life, and that's, I think, very much what all of this work that we're showing you. It's photographers just had this urge and want to just document.
To record.
Yeah. So then I have Robert next, right? So we have another Robert Frank. No, it's okay. Oh, okay, that's fine, Kaylin, yeah. So this is another Robert Frank from the Americans. So Robert, he was given a Guggenheim grant in the 50s to go across America and photograph America. I'm sure, is everyone familiar with Robert and the Americans?
I'm not sure. Many of them are not. Probably.
Okay, so in the early 1950s, Robert applied. He is a Swiss immigrant. So he came over to America in 1947. He did a little bit of commercial work here. He was never really liked the commercial work. He didn't like, answering to the man. He was a rebel through and through. And he became friends with Walker Evans, and Walker Evans encouraged him to apply for a Guggenheim grant. The Guggenheim will give out grants to artists every year and fund projects, basically, so that artists can complete projects. So the Guggenheim gave Robert a grant to drive across America and document America as he saw it. It became a book that was published, a French edition, because Americans wouldn't publish it at this point, in 1958, and received a ton of criticism. I wish I could have shown you the book upstairs, but Kaylin, can you text Ben and maybe have him get my Americans book? It's in one of the drawers in my office, and under the Mizrac, in one of those drawers. So the book was not well received. Critics said the pictures are grainy, they're dark, they're too contrasty, you can't see anything. He's depicting this horrible image of America. And then in 1955, it was published in the United States by Grove Press, the first people to publish it, and it received the same criticism. Jack Kerouac wrote the introduction. For photographers and for artists in general, it became like a Bible. I mean, people just, this was it. You know, like you looked at the Americans and this was it. This was everything. Like Robert was doing it all. And he, talking about taking pictures on the sly, I had the wonderful privilege of knowing him for 20 years. He would take a picture and you wouldn't even know he was doing it. And all of these pictures from the Americans, these people they didn't know. I mean, he used his Leica. He had the ability to take the picture. He wouldn't even look through the lens. I mean, he would just walk and take the picture. So this is one of his prints from the Americans. It's from Indianapolis of a couple on a motorcycle. There's actually someone who went, people are like obsessed with this book, The Americans. There was someone who went back and tried to find as many people as he could who are in these pictures and see where they are today. And someone found this woman, and they were married. They were a couple, they were married. And, you know, she was just so emotional about the picture and just, oh my God, that was the love of my life. He was my husband. He had died like 5 years ago. I mean, it was just, you know, it's amazing. So Robert captured American life. Not everyone agreed with the way he did it, but.
Yeah, it's interesting
Yes.
to think about the environment of the viewing room, which has this ledge so that and there are very few attending.
Do you mind? I'm so sorry. I have underneath the Mizrac in those drawers a copy of The Americans.
On the work of art, not distracted by other things. You've got your Noguchi table, which is a copy of the Noguchi, right?
No,
or is this the original?
this is an original. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So it's and then the nice, comfortable carpeting too. It's all of a piece.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, just a little editorial.
Yeah. Okay, so Ben went up to get a copy of The Americans. You guys can look through it after. So Robert influenced another whole group of photographers. There was an exhibition in 1967 at MoMA. It was one of the more important photography exhibitions at that time, and still is one of the more important photography exhibitions. So John Sarkowski curated an exhibition called New Documents, and it had work by Gary Winogrand, Diane Arbus, and Lee Friedlander. We unfortunately don't have any Friedlander work, and this I'll hold up. This is a Diane Arbus, her greatest image. It's a boy with a toy hand grenade. This is Gary Winogrand from a series that he did in New York at the Central Park Zoo. Again, just capturing life, documenting people without them seeing it. This kind of ties back into the Hujar portrait of animals. This is a portrait of the seal, not of them. It's the seal's looking right at him. It's such a great photograph. And Gary Winogrand was really, really playful with his photography. It's like this loving couple looking at each other, and then this like predator coming after them. Everything has kind of like this inside joke behind it.
Is the Arbus, the little bit of black at the top and bottom, does that mean it's the full image?
Yes, it's the full image, exactly. Mm-hmm.
So has that become a kind of, Rob, you would know probably.
I mean, it's a technique that some artists use to show that it's the full negative, and also today, of course, it shows that it is a negative. It's an analog print potentially versus the digital print. So it's a way of kind of identifying it as an analog object.
Here, I'm going to put the Arbus up there. I know, right? So this.
There is you probably know more.
There's a whole thing about him, right?
Yeah.
I actually do you know the story? Because I can't remember
Well,
it.
he was interviewed on a BBC documentary about photography, and so they found him in the end. They brought him to Central Park in the same place where this picture was taken, and he talks about the experience, and he's pretty sounds much like a fairly normal guy. He comes across here as being kind of crazy.
Absolutely.
Like he's got this, his hands are clenched, and he's got a grenade in one hand. And he talks about, he said, like his parents, they were having divorce, and so he was like a really traumatic time in his life. And they had given him like some kind of candy that he was eating. He loved this sugary candy that got him so hyped up. This is the moment that she was able to catch.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, candy. What kind was it?
He didn't mention the kind, and I can't remember what it was.
That's
It
great.
doesn't exist anymore.
So John Sharkowski said of New Documents in these three photographers, he said, these photographers redirected the technique and aesthetic of documentary photography to more personal ends. Their aim has been not to reform life, but to know it. So, you know, Arbus, everyone says about Arbus that she actually got very close to her subjects. I don't know if this is a good example of it, but the Jewish giant, for example, you know, she became very close to that family and to the, you know, to the subjects of the photograph, and that's why she's able to get similar to Hujar. You know, he knew those people. He was very close to them. That's why she's able to capture these amazing portraits of people.
Yeah, the intimacy.
Yeah,
It's achieved
exactly.
from that knowing, like
Exactly.
Van Gogh, right? The same thing
Yes,
with man.
yes.
It's all about the intimacy that she's able to achieve.
Yep, yep. So feel free if you want to. This is a vintage print, so look at it.
These are amazing.
Printed by
You can
Arbus.
see the original artist print or the
Thank
linogram, print in Central Park Zoo, and like that. I show that picture every year to my students. And
Yeah.
I love that photograph. And
The
never
Central
seen-
Park Zoo, or?
Well, the one with the couple and the.
Oh, I
wolf.
know, isn't it a great one?
It's an absolutely amazing photograph, and I'm not sure I've ever seen it in person, so it's nice to see.
And please give my best to Peter. and
I
thank
will. He's so sorry he couldn't be here. Yeah. You know what, Caitlin? You can tuck those behind the Leroyd if you want. Just put this like facing the wall. Yeah, just you can tuck it. It'll be safe.
him. So you're liking your new dig?
I am. You know, it's so different. It's so
Totally.
different.
Which editions are those? Because
Those are Steidel editions.
Okay, so is that the re-edition? That's not Grove, obviously. So
Yes.
It
Yes.
was reprinted.
Yeah.
Recently, right?
Yes, exactly. So the Americans was printed by a number of different publishers. The Grove edition, which was the very first, we're having exhibitions there. It's kind of more a place where we're keeping inventory. We're doing all of our shipping and receiving out of there. We moved down here with Pace because the amount of traffic and people that actually come into the gallery on 57th Street was nothing compared to here, to being in Chelsea. So I think Pace has, they track how many people come into the gallery. I think for the past 2 Saturdays, they've had 2,500 people just on Saturday come to the gallery, which, I mean,
That's huge.
57th Street, 2. I mean, it's, you know, that's why we're down here, you know, just for the artists so that their work is seen by a broader audience. You know, there are always people that would come to us on 57th Street, of course, but we can just reach so many more being down here. So that was a big reason for doing it. And also, you know, being a part of Pace and integrating the artists and, you know, integrating photography more with paintings and sculptures and not having it be a separate art form, but just have it be an art form. So that was another reason for doing it. The challenges, I think, are what we kind of talked about with how we prioritize our day, is that we're not all together. I think that that's our biggest challenge. We're not all in the same space. But the benefits outweigh that, and we are just better communicators now because we have to be.
So can you speak about what this move means for the future of the gallery and maybe any plans you have?
Well, I mean, the hope of, like I said, was to really integrate photography more, you know, with art, and Pace embraces that, and they always have. I mean, they've been the only gallery for years that has had a gallery devoted to photography. There is no other gallery that's had this. You know, other galleries try to develop photography programs, but it just doesn't, if the support isn't there, it's not going to succeed. So, you know, we just want to expose the artists like Richard Leroy. This is a Richard Leroy from 2019. So he actually, going back to like very old school ways of photographing, he uses a camera obscura to make these photographs. So they are images that are exposed directly onto the sheet of paper. There's no negative. It's completely unique. And he sets up his models the way that the early, portraits were made, because they can't move. So he has, things behind them, things making them comfortable. So this kind of brings it full circle to going back to this current photographer who's in his, how old is he, 50? He's 50, he's young. Well, I think he's young. He's young, and he's, using this antiquarian technique to photograph, but doing it today to make these really beautiful, remarkable images. So we want his work to be exposed and to be seen around the world. And Pace has a location in Hong Kong, and in Seoul, and in London, and in Geneva, and in Palo Alto, California. So it's really an opportunity for the artists that we work with to have more exposure and to have more, exhibitions around the world, and to have more contacts with museums. And so that's what it's for. It's for the artists.
And actually the next question is about the different locations and the extent of interactions between the locations.
So we have had exhibitions, I think actually at every Pace location. Seoul, have we done Seoul? Did they do Penn? Hong Kong did Penn. So Seoul we have not, but every other location. So we have had an Irving Penn show in Hong Kong, and a Richard Avedon show in Geneva. In London, we did kind of a history of photography, where we had Winogrand and Frank and Friedlander and Callahan and kind of all the greats, the classics. We've had shows in Palo Alto. So we work with them a lot. We work with them on inventory, going back and forth. If they have someone who's interested in a Leroyd, we'll send them information. We'll get the work out there. So there is interaction. There also was interaction before we moved down here too, which is kind of an ongoing. We have more and more, I'd say, over the past 10 years, been working a lot more with Pace and the teams around the world to kind of bring photography into the program.
Can you tell us about an exhibition or maybe an experience with an artist that you really connected with or is memorable to you?
Oh God, let me think. I will have to say it is a Robert Frank exhibition that I worked on in 2004. So he had an exhibition in DC that Philip Brookman, who's a very good friend of Robert's and had curated, a lot of his shows before, he curated it at the Corcoran Museum of Art, and it was London, Wales. It was Robert's work. He did a series in London and a series in Wales. And Vicente Tadoli, who's another really wonderful curator, had just become director of Tate Modern, and said to Robert, I want to take Philip's show, but I want to make it bigger. So he did this exhibition, Storylines, which was amazing. I think it's one of the best museum shows of Robert. I mean, there's Moving Out that Sarah did in 1994, Sarah Greenough, and then there's this show, I think is right up there with it. Vicente, do you know him? He's great, and he's totally brilliant, but he's like, yeah, it's all gonna work. It's all gonna be fine. We're gonna figure it out. So, I'm at the gallery, working with Robert, trying to figure everything out, And Robert's the same way, don't worry about it. Vicente has it under control. And I'm like, we have to get the pictures there. It's I need to get these. Someone had to worry about it, and that was me. But then I went for the opening, and it coincided with Robert's 80th birthday, which was really nice. And it was just amazing. So I went there before Robert, because Robert said, you go and work with Vicente to get it installed. So I went. Vicente's Spanish. He has a really, really thick Spanish accent, and he talks so fast. And he had just started at Tate Modern. So the staff there didn't really know him well at all, and he would tell them to put something somewhere, and they would be like, I don't know what he said. So they would look at me, and I would be like, oh, he wants it to go there. Because I had been talking to him on the phone for months and months and months, so I could understand him. But it was amazing to watch Vicente work. It really was. I mean, he is one of the great curators. You guys should look up this show. it's called Storylines, and it was at Tate Modern. It was just really, really great to watch him work, and then to see Robert walk through the show and have 0 negative comments. I mean, everything, it was perfect. They were like the artist-curator relationship, they had it. Like they were they were perfect together. So that may be one of the best experiences.
And finally, what advice would you give to someone looking to get started in the gallery world?
This is relevant to almost everyone here, you know.
I would say get in any way that you can. You know, there are great internships in galleries. Ben is actually one of our interns, and he is amazing, and we will do everything we can to get him a job, if not with us, somewhere. So definitely look into internships, you know. Kaylin was an intern at the gallery, and then we hired her. So internships are really, really important. I would also say I worked at the Whitney Museum, and I was the assistant to the CFO, to the Chief Financial Officer, which was not the job that I wanted at all. Like, I didn't want to work in the accounting department. But I took it. I was like, you know, it's a job. It's going to get me in there. I learned so much doing that because you work with every department. Everyone knows you. You get to know everyone. You work on budgets with people. I mean, it was amazing. It was great. And then I became a registrar at the Whitney, and then I started working for Peter as a registrar, actually. So just, you know, if it's somewhere you want to be, take the job, no matter what it is. I wanted to work at a museum, and getting a job offer from the Whitney, I didn't care where it was. I just wanted to be there. So that would be my advice.
Could you
Good
tell people
internships.
what a registrar does?
So a registrar, what a registrar does at a museum is a little different than what a registrar does at a gallery. So I actually had a really great job there. I had to physically inventory, so I had to put my hands on and find every single work that was in the Whitney collection. So I saw every single piece of artwork that was in the Whitney's collection, which was amazing. And when I was done with that project, they started sending me on courier trips. So I would go to Amsterdam to deliver like a de Kooning and a Jasper Johns painting, and I went to LA, and I kind of did, you know, a few things. The museum world is very different. It's slow. You know, like you're working on a show that's you're working on a show that's like 3 or 4 years out, and I got to a point when I was done with the inventory with the museum collection where I got a little bored. Like there weren't as many courier trips, so I started looking for another job, and I applied for the job as a registrar at Pace MacGill, and everyone at the Whitney said to me, don't stay at a gallery more than a year because you'll never leave. Like, we'll never get you back. And I was like, okay. So I took the job with Peter, and it was just like, this needs to go out today. We have to do this loan paperwork today. Can you inventory this? I need a condition. And I loved it. I love that it was so fast and can be super stressful, but I love the pace of it. So I think it depends on the kind of person you are.
So a courier trip. So if a museum wants to borrow a valuable work of art, usually from another museum, the potentially lending museum may say, well, it's a fragile Kenneth Nolan and important to us. We'll lend it, but you have to send a courier. Mm-hmm. In other words, there is someone from the museum staff who accompanies the picture in the van going to the airport, and then watches it being loaded onto the commercial or cargo flight, or however it's being transported. Physically go on that flight, watch it being unloaded, watch it being loaded onto the van in Paris or somewhere, and then you go to the museum, they unload it, they may say, okay, we're going to let it rest overnight, acclimate, you go back to your hotel and do whatever you want to do.
Have a nice dinner.
See some friends. Then you come back, and then you're there for the uncrating, because you are representing the lending institution, and they're making facility.
A condition report.
Condition report.
Mhm.
So the condition report was made initially at the museum that owns the picture, before it goes out the door. And then a condition report is made when it arrives at the borrowing institution. And then a condition report is made after the exhibition is over, because a courier comes back to bring it back or to the next venue. And then they record the next condition report, and you see whether it's changed from the prior condition report. If the condition has changed, full stop, there's a problem.
Yeah, yeah.
And then a lot of other people are gonna get involved.
Mhm.
And then, but normally, that third condition report's made, the picture gets shipped back to, let's say, the lending institution, and when it arrives back there, another condition report is
Mhm.
made. So
It's documented.
Yeah.
It's a lot of paperwork.
Yeah,
lot of
it
paperwork,
is.
And it's not the most glamorous travel.
No,
'Cause
no. I mean, I flew cargo. Well, actually, I loved flying cargo. But you fly cargo. You know, I mean, you are with
Yeah.
that work. You do not leave it
Yeah.
ever.
I thought it was 2 first-class seats for the work next to you. And that's all hearsay, huh?
But in the gallery too, we do that level of condition reporting. When something leaves, when we receive something, we do a condition report. When it leaves, we do a condition report. If it comes back, we do one. So there is, of course, similarities between the two. I think it's just the pace of it. Although museum work can be very intense too.
Museum time is
Yeah.
different.
Yeah,
No
yes, yes. But I mean, in a gallery, the registrars are responsible for the inventory. I mean, they manage any offsite, at least where we are, they manage offsite storage facilities, they oversee the packing, they do all the condition reports, they do all the cataloging where they, take measurements, note signatures, no annotations, anything that's on the print. We also condition the frames. So that Mizrac that's up in my office, we condition report the work, but we also, because it's an artist frame, that's what we call it when it's an artist specification, we condition the frame as well.
So really, in a way, this functions like a fast-paced museum.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Some more thoughts?
Other questions, Jay?
Have you ever run into issues in your career?
No, I never did, luckily. Yeah, it was always smooth sailing. I did once go to Frankfurt to the Steiglitz Museum, and the exhibition space wasn't ready. So I had to stay there for like another week, which, everyone would think, wow, that's so amazing, but I was in Frankfurt. Like there's only so much you can do there. I saw a lot of movies.
Ben, what's the secret of your success?
I don't know if I quite call it success yet, but I think if I can offer a piece of advice, it'd be to take as many internships as you can. The first internship I took was at a museum in Washington, D.C., and then I went to a gallery from there, and then from there to an auction house, and I kind of got a sense of different directions that one can take out of all these options that seem infinite at first, and you're able to maybe narrow down a little bit better what you might want to do.
Did you major in art or art history?
I majored in both photography and international business.
Photography and international business?
Yes.
Sounds like a good combo.
But that would be my advice.
Cool.
Super.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you for coming.
Okay, guys, so we'll pack